program of Issues in the News. To our viewers and listeners who are joining us from Freedom Radio, Rob Street, Georgetown, welcome to another program of Issues in the News. And last but not least, to the thousands of you who are joining us on Facebook Live across the length and breadth of Guyana, the Caribbean, North America, Europe, Asia, and beyond. Welcome to another program of Issues in the News. Press that share button on your phone, press that share button on your computer, press that share button on your iPad, press that share button on your tablet so that you can share this program to your friends and your followers so that we can have the widest possible audience. Again, share this live, share the program so that your friends and followers can join us in tonight's discussion. I want to begin by dealing with a very topical issue that is permeating the public domain and, of course, the social media landscape. And it is land transactions involving the government of Guyana, in particular, the Central Housing and Planning Authority. A lot has been published, and what have been published have evoked some degree of controversy, public agitation, and at a minimum, public attention. Illegality has been alleged, corruption has been alleged, nepotism has been alleged. And it is the responsibility of the government to try to put the narrative in its proper perspective and to disseminate as far as possible the facts as they can be established by the production of verifiable evidence and empirical data. I am aware that the Central Housing and Planning Authority has spoken on this matter. I am also aware that His Excellency Dr. Mohammed Irfan Ali has spoken on this matter. I will speak on this matter, and no doubt later during this week, the Vice President will speak on this matter. So, I want to first explain that we have a policy in relation to the disposal of state assets, in particular land. That policy is either there must be an expression of interest, inviting investments, or inviting potential applicants to apply for these lands, or there must be an approach to the government with an investment proposal that would entail the investment of substantial capital on the particular land, and that will depend upon the size of land that will be allocated. There also needs to be produced to the satisfaction of the government the requisite capital to develop the project, as well as the potential benefits that the country will derive from this proposed investment. Once the relevant agency is satisfied that those criteria have been met, then the proposals are brought to cabinet and approved by cabinet, and then the project is executed. That is the standard operational procedure in relation to how our government treats with the alienation and or disposal of state lands or interests in state lands. So, and the price, importantly, the price of the land is determined by a number of factors. The market value obviously must be a factor to take into account. And secondly, the volume of the investment that the investor is likely to make. Logically, the larger the volume of the investment, the land would be proportionately cheaper because the government is granting a concession. And that is how a concessionary price to attract the investment, because the country is expected to benefit. When the investment is completed, taxation will be generated, jobs will be created, and employment opportunities would be created. And of course, the people of Guyana will benefit. The magnitude of the benefit will vary from the type of investments. A hospital will benefit everyone, as everyone is entitled to be sick. A recreation center will benefit everyone, everybody requires recreation. And it goes on like that. So those, in my considered view, as far as I'm aware, are the existing policy imperatives which inform the government's treatment with lands. So the first question that has been surfacing and that requires address is how did the CHNPA arrive at a price of $30 million per acre? Nigel Hughes, a politician, has asked that question. And I suppose it's a fair question. And he asked the question in a context as if 30 million is a giveaway price, that he is unaware of any antecedent transactions where any price close to 30 billion has ever been used. And he asked the question in a suggestive manner to imply that that price is one that is rooted in corruption. Anyone who read what he wrote and heard what he said would come to those conclusions. So how did we arrive at 30 million? And that's the first question that I want to address. So in 2020, when we got into government, I received piles and piles of files of transactions that were done under the previous government. Contracts were already signed. Some of them for huge swaths of lands. And let me give you the locations quickly. The Enmore Estate Senior Staff Compound was sold out, all the buildings. Huge swaths of land at Le Souvenir were sold. Huge swaths of land at Chateau Margaux were sold. Huge swaths of land at Ogle in the vicinity of the ExxonMobil head office were sold. Large swaths of land at Providence on the east bank of the Demerara were sold. The Wales Estate Senior Staff Compound was sold out, all the buildings. And tens of thousands of acres of cane lands, or what used to be cane lands, at Wales Estate were given out in leases. Lands along Mandela Avenue in Georgetown were sold. Government reserve along Aubrey Barker Road all the way to Festival City were sold or leases were granted for. The foreshore at Plastic City on the west coast of Demerara, all the way to Crane, the foreshore of Plastic City, all the way to Crane on the west coast of Demerara, were leased. Large swaths of land along the Demerara River bank on both sides were leased. In fact, outrageously, parts of the Demerara River were leased. The bank of the Pomeroon River, several swaths of lands were leased. Along number 19 Public Road on the Quarantine, the foreshore area, large swaths of land were leased. The former Everton bauxite operations on the Berbice River was sold. The Kingston Wharf, a $40 billion wharf, was sold and title passed, and 100 million Guyana dollars was paid out of 8 billion. $8 billion is the value for that wharf. That is what the Attorney General was confronted with. Huge bundles of files. I have been speaking on these matters since 2020. So I am not unfamiliar with these transactions. And if you go back on this very program and on other programs, you will confirm that this is not the first time that I am speaking on these matters. Significantly, obviously I couldn't and we didn't want to review all the transactions over the 5-year period. So the transactions that I have just outlined to you were the transactions that occurred under the previous government between the passage of the no confidence motion, which is 21st of December 2018 until August the 2nd or 31st of July 2020. That is the period that we reviewed. The passage of the no confidence motion until 31st of July 2020. And the no confidence motion, as you know, was the 21st of December 2018. So from December 2018 to July 2020. Just that period. And all those transactions that I have just outlined to you occurred during that period. Now, why did I begin at the no confidence motion? As you know, and as the court pronounced, the no confidence motion was validly passed. And as the court pronounced, and when I say court, I mean the Caribbean Court of Justice, our apex court, as our apex court pronounced, upon the successful passage of the no confidence motion, the government of the day fell. What that means, that the government lost its authority to govern. And the Constitution says that once that happens, the President and the Cabinet must resign and fix a date for election within 3 months. So from December 2018, 3 months thereafter, the Constitution says that they must fix a date for election after resigning. They never resigned, and they never fixed that date for election within that 3 months period. But significantly, the court also pronounced on the status of the government upon the passage of the no confidence motion. The court said that the government was in a caretaker mode. And let me read from the judgment of the CCJ. At paragraph 8 of the judgment, the CCJ said as follows: "It is important, however, that the court makes this point. In mandating that the government shall remain in office, notwithstanding its defeat, and the resignation of the President and the Cabinet, Article 106 envisages that the tenure in office of the Cabinet, including the President after the government defeat, is on a different footing from that which existed prior to the vote of no confidence." Chancellor Cummings Edwards, citing Hogg, the Canadian Hogg, H-O-G-G, the Canadian constitutional expert, was right to note, and they quote the Court of Appeal of Guyana, and the quote is, that the government continues in office as a caretaker government or an interim government until the next election ensues and a president is appointed depending on the results of that election. Unquote. By convention, the CCJ continues, the government is expected to behave during this interim period as a caretaker and so restrain the exercise of its legal authority. So upon the defeat of the government, upon the passage of the no confidence motion, the government stood on a different footing. It moved from a normal, legitimate government with all the panoply of powers of government to a different footing. It moved into a caretaker mode. It was in the form of an interim government, and it is expected to behave that way. What is a caretaker mode? If you put someone in your house to caretake, that person can sell your house, that person can't buy your house, that person can't alter your house without your permission, that person can do nothing to your house without your permission. That person is only to caretake, and that is what the government was supposed to do. By law, they were supposed to continue running the affairs of the country, providing basic utilities and ensuring that the day-to-day business of the nation continues until the next president is appointed. That is what the CCJ said must happen in Guyana. Translate that now practically, and you will realize that the government, after its defeat by the no confidence motion, was not supposed to sell any land, or lease any land, or enter into any new ventures and investments. It's supposed to caretake only. It's supposed to ensure that the health sector continues to provide services. It must ensure that the potable water supply in the country continues. Ensure that all the basic amenities in the country continues. Ensure that the public servants, etc., continue to be receiving their salary. Ensure that the law and order in the country continues until the next election. But what the then government decided to do was to accelerate the dispossession of properties. And that whole long line of hundreds of properties that I spoke to you about were disposed during that period. And it gets even worse, because I have divided the period to demonstrate to you how vulgar these transactions were. So, from the passage of the no confidence motion until 2019 December 31st, President Granger, only on the 30th of December, I think, he fixed the election for March the 2nd. So you had a second phase now, where the country gone into another caretaker state. Because you're going to elections now, you're already defeated. Now you're in an election period now. And then, of course, when they lost the election, they remained illegally in government for another 5 months. So you have these different periods. And during all these periods, they continue to sign agreements of sale, to sign leases, and to alienate properties. So I am going to take my time and go through it by period. So let us take some of the sales that they did. And since Ogle is a place of focus, and since in the vicinity of the ExxonMobil headquarters is the peculiar place of focus, let us focus around that area. That area alone, they sold several hundred acres of properties, of lands, several hundred acres of land. And when they sold it, they never did a plan to demarcate these lands. So they sold them by plots. I remember two transactions distinctly. I don't want to call the names. I'm not going to call names of people other than politicians. In two transactions alone at Ogle, they sold 900 acres each to two different companies. Now, hear me carefully. In both of those transactions, they sold at 30, first of all the lands except one that I will single out and deal with later, all the lands in that Ogle area were sold during that period for $30 million per acre by written agreement of sale. 50% was supposed to be paid as a deposit, and the balance of 50% was supposed to be paid by when the title is passed. That is what the agreement says. in none of the transactions that they did. Neither the 900 acre, two transactions for 900 acres each. Neither those two or any other did they receive 50% deposit as stipulated by the agreement. In fact, they received less than 10%. And 30 million was the price. 30 million Guyana dollars per acre for 900 acre is close to $1 billion. Check it. And they did not receive, listen to me carefully, not a cent was received. Not a cent was received for those two, particularly two largest transactions of 900 acres each. Not a cent was received, and the title was vested. You hear me? And I can produce the agreements of sale. And Jordan, Winston Jordan, using a power that he had as Minister of Finance, vested the title to those two investors or alleged investors without a dollar being paid. That's 900 acres each. That, my friend, is 1,800 acres of land without a dollar paid on the transaction and title vested. And in none of the lands was there anything done to show that a truckload of sand thrown. In fact, you hardly knew where the land was because the way they sold it, they never demarcated it into blocks. So the lands were land blocking each other. There was no access. So if you have a 30-acre plot here, the next person who got a 30-acre plot, unless he's next to the road, he has to go through your land to reach his 30-acre. And the man who got a 5-acre at the side, he got to go through another person's land to get to his land. So they were all interlocked. No demarcation, nothing. In the haste to dispose of these lands before the elections. And you know when the title was vested for these lands? The titles were vested in July of 2020, after they lost the government. After they lost the government in 2020, is when, in July 2020, is when they vested the title for most of the lands in that Ogle area. And 30 million was the price that they fixed. I had to sit down as Attorney General with each of those persons and negotiate with them how to come out of those agreements. I first had to advise the government. Well, there were some that they were so bad that they were illegal from the beginning. And there were some where a deposit, and those that were illegal from the beginning, for example, if you haven't paid $1 and you get state land, well then that's clearly illegal. That transaction is not binding. So those were easy to deal with. But there were many where deposits were paid and title vested without the balance of the purchase price. And a minuscule deposit. But any good lawyer will tell you that once you have a binding agreement, and never mind there's a breach, it's not always easy to come out of it. It is not always easy to come out of it. And we sat with many of these persons. We could have nullified all of them. We could have nullified all of them and lock up many people. But we didn't want to spend 5 years just doing that. We had an agenda to develop the country. So what we did, as far as possible, We try to conclude transactions that persons who entered into them with the government of the day wanted to conclude. And we concluded some of the transactions. Most of them, the people couldn't even find the balance of the money. And they brought back their title. And they rescinded the title and they collect back the deposit that they paid. And I want to credit them. I want to recognize their cooperation in this regard. Because if they didn't, then we would have had to go the legal road, the legal route. And that may have involved the police charges, going to court to sue for breach of contract and for rescission of contract, etc. So some of them, we decided to conclude the transactions. And we concluded the transactions at 30 million per acre. At Providence, we were confronted with the same thing. Many transactions were done there, and many leases were illegally issued. Illegally issued. James Bond is in the magistrate's court charged in relation to those matters. Leases were illegally issued. But the people, the Guyanese businessmen, had already built on the lands. They had invested millions, and we decided to sell them those lands in which the leases were the subject of criminal proceedings and subject of controversy. And the price that we used was the price that we sold at Ogle for, because it was at the same time, 2021, 2022, that all these matters were being addressed. And 30 million was the price that we used. And where we get it from? We got it from the existing agreements which we inherited. So my friends, that is where the $30 million per acre came from. And apparently the $30 million is still being used as the purchase price or the selling price per acre now by the Ministry of Housing. So when they are questioning and seem to be suggesting that 30 million was a gift to some special person, that is not so. And many dozens of people are listening to me who are actually persons who have transactions with the government, and they purchase lands, commercial lands from the government at $30 million. And we can make all those transactions public. So that is how the $30 million was arrived at per acre. In particular, Nigel Hughes, who seemed to be the main protagonist, of this line of questioning of 30 million, I want to address. And I have repeatedly said that something is wrong with that gentleman's cognitive process. That there is something mentally wrong with that gentleman. Many people feel that when he came up, when he conjure up this formula, that 33 is not a majority of 65, they felt that it was an aberration, you know. He made a genuine mistake. That a man who is so well packaged and so well groomed and speaks so well and dresses so well can't be that daft. Well, he's proving to you that he is that way every day. And I don't like to malign people. I am giving you the evidence which he's supplying. So only recently you will recall that he was on Facebook still trying to justify that 33 is a majority of 65. Recently, just 2 or 3 months ago. So it's not an aberration. It's the gentleman's mentality. And why I am saying that something has to be fundamentally wrong, for him to be championing this particular cause, that is to say, to call upon the C.H.N.P. to explain how they arrive at 30 million and who else can get 30 million. This gentleman must know. It cannot be that he forgot, but I don't believe that he rationally reasons. He must know that we have in the government record the fact that he was the lawyer of a company who also purchased land during the very period that I'm speaking about. And his client got a price on the agreement that was lower than 30 million. His client's price was 26 million. I don't know why that particular investor, and I don't mean to tarnish the name of the investor. The investor is an outstanding Trinidadian business, and I don't wish to tarnish. I'm not saying anything here to tarnish the image of that investor. But that investor, for whom Hughes was the lawyer, was the only one that got a price less than 26 million, less than 30 million. That is to say, 26 million. And this is the guy who appeared for that company and signed the documents, is the one who is raising this issue. That is what I am saying to you, that this is evidence rather, that the cognitive process is not working here. This is not a gentleman that you can reside serious responsibilities with. Certainly, this is not a person that you can trust anywhere close to government. Because he must the rational mind, in my view, were I in his position, I would have said, I can't say this. If I say this, the government got the records. They have my signature signing an agreement to sale during a period when a government has fallen. I am there buying land with a client during a period that the government couldn't sell. That's the first thing. But worse yet, and even more importantly, my client is buying less, at a price less than 30 million. Why would you want to go and question that 30 million? Just think about it for yourself in your quiet moment, and you will get an idea of the level, the type of mentality that you're dealing with here. And he's the one who ran to front with the story and published this grand expose. And when he's confronted with the documents that he signed and his client signed, where the price for land in the very area is 26 million, you know what he says? Oh, it's lawyer-client privilege. It's lawyer-client privilege. This fellow is a comedian. Is as comical as his position that he can't speak on oil and gas matters, because instead of choosing Guyana and choosing the people of Guyana's interest, he decides to choose ExxonMobil interest. And this fellow is so illogical in his thinking, rather than try to hide that, rather than try to conceal that and package it in some other way, the man tells you plain to your face. The man tells you plain to your face that instead of choosing Guyana, instead of choosing the Guyanese people's interest, he's choosing ExxonMobil's interest. And then he's asking you, but vote for me. Vote for me. I have your interest at heart. I have Guyana's interest at heart. But I still want to draw from ExxonMobil, so I will look after you now. I'm still working with them. You understand the height of the illogics here? You understand the extent of the ludicrosity? Well, this transaction here that I'm referring to is on par in terms of its vulgarity with that ExxonMobil position. So I can't and I am sure you cannot either rationalize why this guy would make this an issue when he's in the middle of it. The same thing he did with Site Global. The same thing he did with Site Global. He was a company secretary for Site Global. His wife's PR company was the PR company for Site Global and FIP Motilal. And while he was the company secretary and his wife was the PR for that company, his wife goes in the parliament and voted down the Amaila Fall project, the very FIP Motilal's project, the same Site Global project. This man's political career is a very odd one. It does not proceed on logic and common sense. And the duplicity that inheres in this whole imbroglio is amazing. Is amazing. Now, this is the Alliance for Change's leader. And this coalition government, the Alliance for Change, was the major coalition partner with the APNU. So he can't distance himself. So if you know that your party was partis criminis in all these transactions, why on earth are you making it an issue? And the man puts his foot further in his mouth by calling upon this government to halt these transactions, halt all transactions involving state assets until the elections. We were not defeated by no confidence motion. A date is not fixed yet for elections. Elections here is not constitutional due until November. This government has all its panoply and plenitude of power, like every government, as if it was elected yesterday. This government has all the plenitude and panoply of powers of any government legally elected. And this gentleman is asking us to hold on. Don't do anything. Don't sell any assets. Don't enter into important transactions. Don't execute any developmental plans. And he goes back to 2015 when we were in government, and he cites a transaction with oil blocks which were done a couple of months before the elections, and he says that it's the same thing that they did in 2015. Now, you got to be imbecilic. You have to be imbecilic to skip that 5 year of 2015 to 2020 and go straight to 2015 to point out that the PPP did similar things. Whether it's true or not, I don't even know, and I don't care. Well, not that I don't care. I can't believe this guy. But how can you skip the period when your government was in power and when your government did hundreds of transactions after it was defeated by a no confidence motion, after a date was fixed for elections, and worse yet, while it remained illegally in office for 5 months, you continue doing those transactions. Now, any normal, rational man equipped with a fair amount of common sense would understand that, you know what, if I go down this line and I say this, then obviously the other side will come and they will rip apart what I have to say by producing all these transactions. All these transactions of which I was a part. I would have thought so, and I would have stayed very quiet and hoped that this thing passed. And I wouldn't say a word. But this gentleman, that's what I'm saying, is either comedic or it's a travesty. I don't know if it is comic relief or this guy is serious. I don't know which one is worse. Because if it is comedy, then, I mean, he should not consider putting himself up for the presidency. If he's serious, it's worse. It's tragic. It's tragic that he's putting himself up. And because how do you reason these things out? How do you ask a legitimate government that is exercising all its legitimate powers to halt the execution of those legitimate powers until the elections? And the election is 10 months from now, constitutionally due. We must not do any developmental plans. We must not proceed with any investments for 10 months. When your party was in office and defeated by a no confidence motion, you were dissipating assets with an amazing speed. And even after you lost the government, and you stayed in the government for 5 months illegally, you were still signing properties over, completing the transactions that you did at the time when you were illegal. But prior to the elections, the BK Wharf, the title was vested after they lost, after March 2nd. It was vested, I think, in July or March the 28th, I think. And dozens of transactions. Winston Jordan vested the title after the March 2nd. In June, in July, some in May of 2020. Long after they lost government. He's not supposed to be signing anything. They lost. And that's when they were vesting the orders. And these vesting orders, in law, constitute title under the Public Corporations Act. That's the act that he's using to sign these titles off. Because you can present that title at the deeds registry and convert it into a transport. So for all intent and purposes, for all legal purposes, it is a transport. It is a transport. And that is how they were vesting transports. Without even, imagine 900 acres of land at Ogle next door to ExxonMobil. 2 plots of 900 acres. And they vested title without receiving $1, $1. And this man, Nigel Hughes, whose party was part of that government, is now telling a legitimate government, no, we must hold our hands. You see the hypocrisy, the duplicity, and the nonsensical utterances that comes come from this gentleman, and yet he expects you to take him seriously. Now, as I said, I don't want to go through all the transactions. I have them here. There are pages and pages. I summarized them. I didn't want to walk with all of them. But in Linden, hundreds of transactions were concluded in Linden after the no confidence motion. And some of the persons who benefited, who benefited from the land deals in Linden, as I said, I will call politicians' names, included, and they can sue me if they wish. I'm not in Parliament. Let them sue if they think that I am wrong, or if I am wrong, and I am maligning them and libeling them. Amanza Walton Desir was a recipient of land during this period. Jermaine Figuera and his brother, Yearwood, I can't remember her name, the former Minister of Housing. All of them got lands in Linden during this period. One of the recipients, I don't want, that person is not in Parliament, but many, many of their friends and cronies got lands all over. They knew that the lands were given to them illegally. Some of them never even come forward. Some of them never even come forward, to their credit. The one who got the land from Plastic City, all the way to Crane, the whole seawall. That's about 8 to 10 miles of foreshore property, seawall front, that gentleman has a lease for. Could you believe that? He had better sense than to come forward. I've never seen him. Called him several times, never turned up. So we simply rescinded the transactions. And dozens of those along the riverbanks. And these guys are questioning. And importantly, dozens of these transactions were never even taken to cabinet. Never even taken to cabinet. The BK Wharf matter, the Kingston Wharf, was never received cabinet's approval. Never. Never. That matter, as you know, is in the court. We went to court with a few of these that I'm speaking about, but they were all resolved. So I thought that I would spend some time tonight to address these issues. Now, I don't work with the Central Housing and Planning. I don't monitor their day-to-day activities. So I am not in receipt of who gets lands or not following the government's process. So I don't know whether this company gets land or that company. I don't. Transactions come to me for legal advice when legal issues arises. I don't know, and I'm not here to defend who buy property in New York and how they get properties in New York and how they pay for it. That's not my business. And that's not the government's business either. So don't pin that on or ask me to explain that. I'm not here to explain that. I am unaware of that, and that is not government's business. The particular gentleman, I have seen his resignation, I have seen his public statement. That issue, I suppose, will be dealt with by his lawyers, but that's not the government's business. I thought that I'll spend some time tonight to put into perspective how the $30 million purchase price was arrived at and the type of transactions that we inherited and what we had to do to get out of these transactions and to demonstrate the ludicrosity, to demonstrate the outrageous statements that are emanating from certain politicians. and to establish, more importantly, that they themselves were involved in worse than what they are complaining about now. I want to thank you very much for spending the last 55 minutes to an hour with me. I think I have exhaustively, well, not exhaustively, but I have comprehensively addressed the issues that I want to address. And I hope that you have now a clearer understanding of the issues that are in the public domain, and you can now approach these matters from a more factual and historical perspective. Thank you very much, and join me next week when we continue our discussions.